After a long and controversial involvement with the experimental group Tin Machine, David Bowie has now resumed the solo career he abandoned after the release of Never Let Me Down in 1987. The new album, as adventurous and eclectic as anything he's done in his 30 years as a professional musician, was started at the beginning of last year, when his forthcoming marriage to the Somalian model Iman inspired him to write some spiritual music for their wedding service.
I guess that was the real plunge that caused this to be a solo album, because of Iman's parents being Muslim, and her whole family is Muslim, and my family is Church of England, Protestant, whatever, however lapsed, and we were marrying in a church in Italy. It was important for me to find something that also had no sort of representation of institutionalized and organized religion, of which I'm not a believer. I must make that clear. And so I started writing music for the service that again, tried to reflect and incorporate the feeling that I felt that we had as a relationship and what our relationship meant to us. And it was strictly instrumental, but just to try and find those passions and those spiritual feelings that we had with each other. And doing that opened this sort of virtual floodgate of sort of other emotions and things that I kind of wanted to say and delve a bit deeper into the last 2 or 3 years of my life. And it by virtue of that, became an album of writings and even incorporating other people's songs to reflect the ways that I felt about things. I mean, Night Flight by Scott Engel, for me, was an absolutely accurate summary in a way of how I felt what our relationship was. It was something neither of us had really expected and probably didn't want. But it happened, and at our age, I'm 37, me 46, probably the last thing that both of us thought would ever happen to us. And it's a hell of an exploration and sort of this kind of adventure, and you don't quite know where it's going to take you to. And that song really felt like it, this kind of dangerous territory that we were embarking on. Oh crikey, what have we done now?
There's no hope. The moving has come through. The danger passing you turns its face into the heat and runs the tunnels. It's so cold. The dark, dark are piled up. The stitches torn and broke. The raw meat fist you choke has hit the bloodline. Glass traps open and closed on night flights. Broken legs, weather-faced press the walls. Be my love, we will be ghosts on night flights. With only one promise, only one way to fall.
David Bowie's version of Night Flights, first recorded by the Walker Brothers in 1978. Bowie was moved to write the title track, Black Tie, White Noise, during the riots provoked by the Rodney King verdict. He couldn't have picked a more dramatic moment to arrive in Los Angeles.
I got in with Iman the day the riots started and was here during the duration of them, and the feeling of both the inevitability of the riots because of the decision and the numbing quality of it all was quite... I think it really illustrated that so many people in America feel that they are unfairly imprisoned within the lower rungs of society, and it's a prison from which they see no real escape. And I think it really felt, because of that, felt like a prison riot more than anything else, or the beginnings of a revolution. From my understanding of what's been happening in America, blacks are now worse off than they were even 5-6 years ago. And one obviously pins a lot of hope on the new administration to not burst that bubble of enthusiasm that swept them into power.
Getting my facts from a Benetton ad.
look into African eyes, lit by the glare of an LA fire. I've got a face, not just my race. Bang, bang, I got you, man. Cranking out the white noise. The sun comes up and the man goes down. Woman comes again. Just an hour or so to be safe from fear. Then we jump through hoops with invisible now. Just disappear. Cranking out the white noise. We reach out over us and hold each other's hands and die in the flame, singing shall overcome. What's going on? There'll be some blood, no doubt about it. What will come through, don't doubt. I look into your eyes and I know I won't kill you. I look into your eyes and I know you won't kill me. You won't kill me. You won't kill me, no. But I look into your eyes and I wonder sometimes. Putting on the black tie, cranking out the white noise. Oh Lord, just let him see me. Lord, Lord, yeah. Let him hear me. Let him call me brother. Let him put his arms around me. Let him put his hands together. Reach out over race and hold each other's hands. Walk through the night thinking we are the world. What's going on? There will be some blood, no doubt about it. He should come through. I look into your eyes and I know I won't kill you. And I turn my back for I know you won't kill me. You won't kill me. You won't kill me, no. But I wonder why. Yes, I wonder why sometimes. Putting on the black tie, cranking out the white noise. They'll show us how to break the rules, but never how to make the rules. Reduce us down to witless husks. Fascist cries go black and white. Who's got the blood? Who's got the blood? Cranking out the white noise. Ooh, yeah. Cranking out to the city.
Black Tie, White Noise, a duet with Al B. Sure. As well as responding to the LA riots in the song, Bowie also acknowledges the enduring power of Marvin Gaye's classic State of the Nation album, What's Going On?
Yeah, it's a straight out now homage to him, because I think of all black music, I guess that album by Gaye was really a milestone in the black voice being heard in the musical arena. It was such a stunningly committed album. And because of the nature of the subject matter of that particular track, I wanted to pay some kind of, due back to him.
Bowie's co-producer on Black Tie, White Noise is Nile Rodgers. Their last collaboration was in 1983 on the most commercially successful album of Bowie's career, Let's Dance. Nile Rodgers.
With David, what I want is a really great record that people love and they understand where he's coming from and where I'm coming from. And they go, wow, that's cool. I hear it. I hear the growth and the development. I don't want them to go, no, that's weird. It doesn't sound like China Girl. I don't want to hear that. But I know it's inevitable on some level. You can't help but compare it because, you have a record like Let's Dance. It's impossible to not compare it to that. And he and I, the first thing we did was sort of like rewrite this song. It's called You've Been Around. And we started writing, it's strange, like almost by like airmail or something. I always used to see these games of chess being played by two masters in remote corners of the world, you know? And that's what it was like. You know, David would call me from Switzerland and say, I'm sending the tapes to you. Now you work on them for a while, then I'll work on the stuff, then send it back to him in California. Then we get together for 2 or 3 days only, work on it together, then write a new song. And that's how we started the record in the beginning. And it was a lot of fun because you could work and then you could sit down and compare notes. And the thing that was really fantastic about Dave at this time is that he was so at peace with himself and everything that had taken place over the last few years that once again we were doing the record and he was paying for it out of his own pocket, but there was none of that pressure. He didn't say like, well, you know, now we got to finish this record in 2 months. He was like, I don't care how long it takes and how much it costs. As a matter of fact, something really funny that he said to me, which I actually think is brilliant, which sort of sums up his whole new attitude. He says, unlike the last time we did the record where we were concerned with every penny, this time he says to me, he says, no, let me know when we get to somewhere around $3 million. He says, because the way I look at it, we got about $4 million to make this record. I said, boy, that's exactly the opposite of before. No record ever cost $3 million, but he was dead serious. I mean, you could sort of sum up his whole artistic and personal and spiritual development in that one statement.
Where's the pain in the violent night? I'm depressed by the grin. I stayed over many years. I should have thought of that. For the love of the money, like a black-hearted violin. It's the nature of being. It's too many lonely nights. I can't tell bad from wrong. I can't pass you by. To exchanging. You've been around, but you've changed me. Where the flesh meets the spirit world, where the traffic is thin, I slip from a vacant view. I should have thought of that. And the sound of tomorrow, like a black-hearted violin, like the silence of tension. It's too many lonely nights. I can't tell good from bad. I can't pass you by. To exchanging, you've been around, but you've changed me. You've been around and pass you by. You've been around, but you've changed me.
After 11:30 tomorrow, more from David Bowie. David Bowie's new album was Jump, They Say, a song partly inspired by Bowie's stepbrother Terry, who was to take his life after a long history of mental illness. And that's where we pick up our conversation with David Bowie in this series of 3 exclusive previews.
I've attempted to at least get near the situation of his suicide, which for me was absolutely incomprehensible and probably something I refused to accept for quite some time because I hadn't made any contact with him, and I felt probably very guilty that I hadn't made any physical contact. I've lost that guilt now because I don't really believe that anything would have prevented his suicide. I'm not naive to believe that one man can really save somebody who's in such a state of absolute depression, that it can really be done. Everybody does have, in the end, control over their own lives and over their own destinies. But it has bothered me an awful lot. The song is not biographical by any stretch of the imagination. It's my impressions of what I believe I felt about Terry, and in conjunction of how I felt about myself, metaphysically jumping into things. So it was really a combination of both of us. There is a philosopher whose name I wish I could remember, who said that one creates the doppelganger so that you can inflict one's own fears and guilts and passions and the darker sides of one's personality onto that doppelganger, and then you kill him and hope by doing that you no longer retain those weaknesses and faults yourself. I feel that's probably played not a small part in my life. The idea of the doppelganger as being somebody that I can affix my own fears and paranoias on. Artists are really messed up, you know.
When comes the shaking man, elation in his eyes, striped with blood and emblazed tattoo, streaking cathedral side. They say, he has no brain, they say. He has no moon, they say. He was born again, they say. Look at him climb, they say. Jump. They say, jump. Has two gods, they say. He has no fear, they say. He has no eyes, they say. He has no mouth, they say. Hey, that's really something. They feel he should get some time. I say he should watch his dance, my friend. Don't listen to the crowd, they say. Shout.
Over the years, it seems that I've mythologized my stepbrother far more than and more actively than he actually took part in my life. I know that one, he did guide me towards reading a lot more than I read, and steered me to areas that I wouldn't probably have found on my own, things like Jack Kerouac and beat authors. And I know he had an interest in jazz, but I've subsequently read that I've said that he took me to jazz clubs, which is not entirely true. I would love him to have taken me to jazz clubs, but I just used to take myself to jazz clubs. I did, in fact, take him to a Cream concert at Bromwell Court, which would have been, I guess, 1967, something like that. And I was very disturbed because the music was affecting him adversely, because he His particular illness was somewhere between schizophrenia and manic depressiveness. And I know that he was getting to a pretty tranced out state watching Cream, because I don't think he'd ever been to anything as loud as that in his life. And I remember having to take him home because it was really affecting him.
It's a mark of Bowie's lasting affection for Cream that he's chosen to revive one of their earliest tracks on the new album. I Feel Free was a song he used to play during his Ziggy Stardust days, making it a perfect choice for a jubilant reunion with his old mate from the Spiders from Mars, Mick Ronson.
I thought, well, if Mick and I are going to work together, let's try and make it mean something. Give it some kind of, at least for us, give it some depth. And I just picked on that one because that was an encore number that we used to do. The approach was dictated by the musicians I was working with. I mean, there was no way that it was going to be a copy of the Cream version. The guys infected it with such life that it was just a joy, because I was sort of a little cautious about approaching that song because it's such a sort of classic to Cream fans. But I really like the version we did. I think it's a whole new reading of it, and I think it's very successful.
David Bowie's version of I Feel Free, featuring Mick Ronson on guitar. Most of the other musicians on the album were working with Bowie for the first time.
Barry Campbell, the bass player, is totally new. He's a guy that Niall had wanted to work with for a few months. He'd found him working in a club in New York as a bass player, and I don't think Barry had done any studio work before, so he was a first time out. The young guy, great, wonderful bass player. Drummer, who coincidentally is also called Campbell Sterling. Sterling I'd known for a long time, actually, because he was the drummer for Duran Duran at one time. When Duran were touring with me back in, must have been, was that the 83 tour? I think so. I think Duran did a stretch with us up in Canada on that tour, and he was their drummer at that period. So I knew Sterling. And then Philip Sazy is a Frenchman who's been ensconced in New York for about 8 years. I guess he's the only session man that we used in as much as the others are kind of working musicians outside of the studio. And he's a wonderful talent. He's been on more albums than one can think of. And the other guys, I guess, Lester Bowie, somewhat falls in the category of a Miles Davis type. He's an older guy. He's eccentric and plays much in the same style as Miles. Lester is incredible. He's quite experienced. We only brought him in because it was such a jive thing to do, like the Bowies together at last. And then he was such fun that we had him on like 50% of the album by the end of it. We'd only written him in for one song, just to kind of get him to guest on it. But he was great, really great. I mean, he's like also uncontrollable. I mean, he wouldn't listen to any of the tracks. And we'd say, you know, we want you to do this track. He said, don't play me no track. He said, I'm going out there. So just pump it through the speakers. And he would just play. Immediately he'd start. He wouldn't know what key it's in, nothing. And he'd just play, and that was it. And you had to grab what, you know, and then when he finished the take, he said, that's it. You know, well, how about another take, Lester? Oh, all right, but just start it from the middle. Don't tell me where you're going to start it from, you know, and like anything to put him off his guard. He would make the situation so he was, you know, just jumping in at the deep end all the time. He was an extraordinary man to work with. And they had to follow him around the studio because he wouldn't listen on headphones. He'd have it playing through the loudspeakers. And so you had all this dreadful leakage coming through his microphone when you could get him on the mic. So you had to, like, this one take, we had one guy following him around with a boot because he's wandering all over the studio. I mean, he's something else.
Looking for Lester, featuring the saxophone of David Bowie and the trumpet of Lester Bowie, who would tease David by comparing his sax playing to that of Bill Clinton. But Nile Rodgers, who co-produced the album, is rather more complimentary.
I actually happen to think his sax playing on this record is really cool. I think that what it is it's like David was trying to explain it to me, what he was going for. And he was saying how it was like a young kid when they get their first guitar and they plug in the fuzz box and they get all these great, interesting sounds. And artistically, they're experimenting with the sound. They love what they hear and they're just thrilled by it. And that's sort of conceptually what he was doing. You know, it's very processed. It's not just straight sax sound. It was like, you know, he wanted to be this teeny bopper with this, it's what he calls the dog sax sound. And that's what we wound up calling it, the dog sax. That's our special setup. And we know how to get it every time now.
In an album chock full of surprises, perhaps the most unexpected track is Bowie's version of the recent Morrissey song, I Know It's Gonna Happen Someday. So why on earth did he pick that one?
Well, he nicked one of my songs, so I nicked it back again. It's a fair cop. He did a lovely parody of Rock and Roll Suicide. He uses the same chord sequence at the end of this particular song on his last album, Your Arsenal. Coupled with the fact that Mick Ronson produced it, I could see what was going on there. And I thought, well, okay. And the sentiment of that song is not dissimilar to the sentiment of Rock and Roll Suicide, which is just have some kind of faith and things will work out. So I kind of knew where it was all coming from. And I thought, well, okay, if I were to do that song, I would do it like I would have done it in 1973, 74. So I've done a kind of a action or kind of derision. But he did say, it's very grand. Which I would agree with him. It is very grand.
More from David Bowie. Same time tomorrow, around about 20 minutes to midday.
burning up each other's love, burning up our lives. Tread up kinds of working out, miracle good night. Future full and empty, knocking on the door. Ragged lane and hungry mama, miracle no more. Turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. Morning star, you're beautiful, yellow diamond high. Spin around my little room, miracle good night. Evening flower all alone, how's the lane can be? Haven't got a death wish, just want a little more. Turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. Miracle good night. Turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. It was only make-believe.
I wish there was a sailor 1,000 miles from here. I wished I had a future anywhere.
I love you in the morning sun, I love you in my dreams. I love the sound of making love, the feeling of your skin, the corner of your eyes. I long forevermore, I never want to say goodnight. Miracle goodnight, oh, turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. Miracle goodnight, turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. It was only make-believe.
Don't want to know the past. Don't want to know the real deal. Really don't want to know that. Less we know, better we feel. That's just a relationship song, and it's nothing very deep. I think the nicest thing about it is the riff. I mean, it's a riff that sort of will never, it just doesn't stop. It's one of those things that really grabs you, and there's no real point in going to anything else because the riff is strong enough to carry the whole piece, which indeed it does, to the point of repetition. Very simple song.
Morning star, you're beautiful, yellow diamond high. Spinning around my little room, miracle. Make it alright. Nobody dancing. Miracle good night. Turn it around. Make it alright. Nobody dancing. It was only make-believe.
Miracle Good Night. And while Bowie is a little offhand about the track, his co-producer, Nile Rodgers, is thrilled with it.
I think it's an amazing song, and I think that when people think of what David and I would do, because a lot of times you have to think about what people think. David doesn't really think about that too much, but I give it a lot of thought, and I think that's my job. I have to be really responsible and sort of more down to earth and have to say, David, you're a wonderful artist, but let's do this. But the interesting thing, and I guess I'm really proud of him, is that he doesn't care. I mean, he's almost like, nah, if we put that out, people are going to say, man, you guys are just going for some commercials. And I'm saying, David, it's an amazing record. No one's going to say that. And if they do, so what? It's amazing. It's an undeniable, great smash record that you can't stop singing that little hooky harmonica guitar melody. And what David's going through right now is the music is making him very happy again. And because I've been a fan of his, I love to see that. It's funny, for me, one of the great things about this record, and there are many great things, but one of the best things was to see how happy he is and how wonderful and how artistically satisfied he is.
Talk to anyone in the Bowie camp and they'll confirm what Niall says. David is feeling very happy about his music, and that happiness has been intensified by a spiritual rejuvenation.
God is on top of it all. God is on top of it all. God is on top of it all. That's all.
it's been reverberating within me for some time. Maybe it's something that I'm acknowledging, not only in a way publicly, but also to myself. That when one does turn oneself over to God in terms of that one doesn't have the control over life or the circumstances or relationships or anything to the degree that one wishes one could exert, I think it's inevitable that eventually you get to the realization that there is not necessarily something that we could conceive of as a plan, but there is an order in that which we perceive of as chaos. And that order comes from God. And I guess there's some voices given to that on this album, maybe in not quite such a pontificating manner. I'd hate to think that I was a deliverer of polemic. I'm not like that. I work on intuition and impressions more than anything. I think my writing has a lot to do with my impression of life rather than an accurate, clarified view of it. I'm not a Dylan, and I'm not somebody who can sit down and stoically write a clear picture of what's happening, you know. But I can leave a very strong impression of how I feel about things. Too strong sometimes. But this one I really feel is a fairly accurate reflection of my state of mind. It doesn't have the same pain as some of the other albums. There's almost a joy in there, which is nice to see peeking through at long last.
God is on top of it all. That's all.
The diversity of this album couldn't be more apparent than when you contrast Pallas Athena, Bowie's affirmation of his faith in God, with Don't Let Me Down and Down, his soulful interpretation of a Moroccan love song he'd recently discovered.
It was an Arabic album that was sort of lying around the house when Iman and I first met, and it was one of the songs that we were playing all the time. I adored it. I thought it was so quirky and sweet. They did it in 3/4 with, I don't know, bazooka and gong or something. I mean, it was a really strange little song. I put it into 4/4 and made it an R&B ballad, and it kind of worked. I mean, when I took it in the studio and played it to Niall, he couldn't believe that we could make a song out of it that would be sort of recognizable. But I saw this germ of beauty in it. I think it's a very sweet song.
Nile Rodgers.
The thing that was hysterical about this, I don't know if you'll ever get a chance to hear the original version of this song, but if you do, it's highly entertaining. It seems like these people just bought a drum machine and had no idea how to synchronize it. And they pushed the button and just let it play free with the band. And it's all over the place. It's just randomly playing. But in the midst of this sort of semi-chaotic track, there's this beautiful song, this incredibly haunting, beautiful song with cool jazz chord changes in the middle of this very chaotic, bizarre production. And we were hysterical with laughter, thinking like, how the hell did David hear this? I always wonder where he is. It's like God touched him or something. Where is he when he hears these things? Where is he when he runs across this kind of stuff? Because if I heard this thing, I'd immediately dismiss it and move on. But he heard it and was thrilled about bringing this to us. And we just all sat in the studio with these perplexed looks on our faces, and we were laughing. But see, the thing is that I've done this with him before, so I know that from a perplexed look, in a few weeks is going to be a really great song.
Still I keep my love for you. No place to hide, no way to fall. Nowhere to lie, no world so wide. I'm sick and tired of telling you, don't let me down, down and down. Don't let me down and down and down. I know there's something in the wind, that crazy balance of my mind. What kind of fool are you and I? Scared to death and tell me why. I'm sick and tired of telling you, don't let me down and down and down. down and down and down. Still I keep my love for you. Destiny, you jog in my memory. You haunting mind, no fade away. I'm sick and tired of telling you, don't let me down and down and down. Don't let me down and down and down. Don't let me down and down and down. I'm sick and tired of telling you. Still I keep my love for you. No place to hide, no way to fall. Don't let me down and down and down. Don't let me down and down and down. Still I keep my love for you. Don't let me down and down and down.
Don't Let Me Down and Down. Well, Bowie might adore that song, but he does have mixed feelings about what he calls the bonus track on the album, Lucy Can't Dance.
That's my least favourite track on the album. I can't help but tell the truth about that one. I didn't want to put it on the album, you see, but my record company really liked it a lot, and as we're new to each other, I didn't want us to fall out quite as soon as... Well, no, my track record's not bad, but I do tend to inevitably fall out with the companies that I'm with, and I didn't want it to start this early. So I said that as long as it wasn't in the body of the album, but if I could put it on as a bonus track, I'd let them get away with it. I like the lyrics, don't get me wrong. The lyrics are good. I just find the tune so incredibly twee.
Now, Rogers.
He hates it. He hates it. He doesn't even want it on the album, and I had to fight. It's amazing that this record has been a battle. He and I, we fight every day because, like I said, to him artistically, he's completely satisfied, and he'd be thoroughly happy without Lucy Can't Dance on the record. He'd be fine. And I had to beg and beg and beg and beg and beg. So finally he's put it on there, and I'm going, David, this is happening. To me, if we release Lucy Can't Dance, Miracle Goodnight, Black Tie, White Noise, we'd be sitting with like a huge record. You know, I'd be, ladies and gentlemen, yes, no, right, thank you. I'd like to thank the Academy. I'd like to thank Mr. Bowie for giving me the chance. So, but the thing that's interesting is that he doesn't, and I gotta say, I have a lot of respect for him. He's not worried about that. He's like, forget it. We don't need Lucy Can't Dance. I like going, yeah, we do. Sure we do. Let's put it out right now. I'd be fine with that. I'd be the happiest guy in the world. Put out Lucy Can't Dance, no problem. I think it's a great song.
Lucy, I know what you're going to do. Oh, Lucy, look what you're doing. I'm doing it too. trust him at once, which is something these days. Lucy can dance to the noise, but she knows what the noise can do. Lucy can dance to the noise, but she knows what the noise can do. Did the world just explode? Don't recognize anyone, but you still got me under your thumb. Lucy can dance to the noise, but she knows what the noise can do. Lucy can dance to the noise, but she knows what the noise can do. Pursuing your frenzy in its also boy. In the sexual buzz, we should throw on top of toy. You live and you die in the blink of an eye. But I can't make you dance. Lucy can dance, dance to the noise. Lucy can't dance, but she knows what the noise can do. Lucy can dance, dance to the noise. Lucy can dance, but she knows what the noise can. Lucy can dance, but she knows what the noise can. Lucy can dance, but she knows what the noise can.
Lucy Can't Dance. Opening the album as an instrumental, the wedding song is reprised as the concluding track, this time with a Bowie vocal celebrating his marriage and his newfound contentment.
I see this album as something that had to be written because of my initial wanting to write the church music, but it's not about the wedding. That was a starting point. It's far wider, it's far more diverse than that, because it prompted me into writing a lot more about the subjects and about attitudes and emotions and whatever that had been going through me over the last 2 or 3 years. I found that it became a source of woodwind and keyboard instruments that sort of dominated the album. I guess that would be a reaction to working with the highly aggressive guitar orientation of Tin Machine. And I don't know whether it's polarized the situation, but I would imagine that I may vacillate backwards and forwards in the future between Tin Machine and maybe a wider berth, other avenues that have now sort of been opened up to me on solo albums. And again, as always, which is always the most exciting thing, I haven't a clue what I'll be doing next.
These are silver wings. These are golden eyes. These are floating clouds. Angel for dreaming alone, and I feel that someone listens to me. Angel for these are silver wings. These are golden eyes. These are floating clouds. Angel for just like a good boy should. I'm gonna change my way. For all the saints alive, don't I feel like a saint alive? She's not mine for eternity.
segments of David Bowie in conversation, previewing his new album exclusively to 1FM, and produced by Kevin Howlett.
1FM.